In this episode, artist and gallery owner Dan Addington provides great insight for artists you don't want to miss.
Resources, inspiring interviews, business practices, and practical advice to take your art career to the next level. Join Sergio Gomez in today's Artist Next Level and get ready to take control of your career.
Hello friends, I'm really excited to have with me Dan Addington. Dan is an artist and a gallery owner who has been exhibiting his work professionally since 1992. His paintings have been featured in group and solo shows across the United States and are in public and private collections. In addition to his role as practicing artist, Dan has served as curator and director of various galleries since moving to Chicago in 1995. He has been owner and director of Addington Gallery in Chicago since 2007. Dan has also served as juror for exhibitions at various colleges and universities and art centers, as well as he's a member of the Chicago Art Dealers Association. And I am really excited to have him in the program today. Hi Dan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Are you ready to take us to the next level?
Yes, I'm ready to climb.
Awesome. Well, we're all climbing with you today. And Dan, you're a great friend, and thank you for doing this for us and being in our program today. You're an artist. You own a gallery. You are very active. The shows that I've been at your gallery, they're always top notch. They're always great quality, and you're a great professional. And I think we have a lot we can learn from you, and that's why I invite you to be our guest today.
Great.
Well, as we get started, I have some questions that I want to ask you, and then we'll see what kind of conversation we get from them, see what we can learn from you. So here's the first one. Tell us first a little bit about you, a little bit about your art practice, and also about your gallery.
A little bit, huh? Well, I've been living in Chicago since the early 90s. I got an MFA from downstate, Illinois State University in Bloomington Normal, and then moved up here and started showing my work, pretty quickly once I got into town. And I guess there's always been kind of a two-track thing going on. I always, in all three of the schools that I went to for the three different degrees I have, I participated in the galleries there and worked in the galleries and became really intrigued with ideas about curation and, putting juxtaposing artists' work and putting things together. And I noticed that there were a lot of, when I was a student, it seemed like there were a lot of, you could almost draw a line down between between students that were really interested in the art that other people were doing, the art that other artists were doing, both out in the world and their friends and then you had the other group that it kind of felt like, don't pollute my mind, I don't have time to be looking at other people's art. It's just going to influence me, and any influence is a bad influence, and I want to be pure. And or maybe it wasn't even all that thoughtful, but it could have just been like, people being very dedicated to the practice of their own studio. And, I come out of a theater background. I was a theater major as well as an art major. And, at that age, it was very, the idea of collaborative art forms was very seductive, because you get instant gratification from an audience, when you're acting. And then there's that collaborative theatrical thing, you're putting something together, all of you. And that was very different from really having to be intentional about carving time away in the studio. And so I spent a lot more time in the theater department for a number of years there, and playing in bands and stuff, which was also a collaborative thing. I was never interested in doing solo things. And so I guess the point being that even when I was, studying for my master's degree, I was really intrigued by the idea of putting together shows where there were a lot of artists involved. And I was working under Barry Blinderman. We're probably jumping ahead here because
no, that's okay. That's good.
Talking about, I mentioned him because he was a very influential, I guess, mentor to me at that age. And in that context. And so, I would be involved in putting together shows with him, and we would be dealing with artists, practicing artists, professionals, and then when we were putting student shows up. And I just was always interested. The point of all this is that I was always interested in what other artists were doing too, you know?
So you have on one side the artist who's developing, his voice, his way of making art, emphasis on process, working with, what your passion is about in the art. And then at the same time, you're developing this interest in collaboration, in working with others, in curation, and you start working with the gallery. Tell us a little bit about that. How did that transition came for you? How did you become a gallery owner?
These have been separate, but they have been equal but separate, and some maybe not always equal. But the pursuit of art has always been the tip of the spear for me. Right. Making my own work, I would not be as compelled to show the work that I show if I didn't have the experience of making it. I don't think that's not that's not fundamental to most curators or gallery, certainly not gallery owners that I've known, but there are more now than ever before that have studio experience, and when they are looking at another artist's work, they're looking at it from a lot of different points of view, because they've made artwork, so so they do work hand in hand, but they often feel very separate too. And there have been times when they felt at war with each other.
Oh, really?
Because they demand time. Yeah, isn't that's what we all?
No, exactly.
What we do. It's the number one complaint of anybody is that we just don't have enough time. And to the point where you just get sick if you hear one more person say, "Oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time." But guess what? That's what we all. It's how we all live.
Exactly. It used to be sometime that I would wonder, how people can write a book and do this and do that and do all these other things. And it has taken me, kind of years to figure things out. And now when I teach other people, when we talk about this career of art, and the way I see it is kind of a highway, in that which I call it flow. And I teach about the flow. So it's a highway in which you have different lanes at different speeds. But as long as you know you are going the right direction, then you are okay. The problem is when you don't know what direction you're taking, that you start to having difficult times.
Yes.
But as long as
you've signed on for enough jobs when you've decided to be an artist.
Exactly.
Because as we all know, to be an artist, you've got to be a promoter, and you've got to be a communicator, and you've got to be a salesman, and you've got all these different things. You've got to be an administrator. And that's just with your own work. And
exactly.
But there is something very satisfying about promoting other people's work, and it gets you. For me, I'm like anyone. I can get very self-involved, and artists can be very self-involved people. In fact, how are they going to make good art if they're not? To some degree,
Exactly.
In some ways, you've got to embrace that. But for me, it's been, I think, good, because it gets me out of my own head when I'm promoting other artists' work. It isn't just about me anymore. It's like getting money into the hands of other artists that are making what I consider to be important work. So
exactly. No, that's great, Dan. Now let's move on into some of the personal stories that we can also learn from. And I'm sure that in your career, in your long career as a gallery owner, working with artists and so forth, you have probably faced some struggles, some difficult times. So tell us about just one disappointment, one failure, one hard time, and most important, what did you learn from it? What was it like, and what was the lesson learned there? Because I think we can all learn from those things.
Yeah, well, you're assuming that I learned from them, but yeah. And just to pick one, that can be challenging. Right, but you mentioned this before, and I was thinking about that, and there have been, I guess there would be stories on both sides of the fence, right? As an artist, and also as a gallery. But I think that as an artist, everything is like right close to the bone. Like if I mess up in a gallery situation, it's almost like that's why you're incorporated. It's like that's what incorporation means in the legal sense, but I wonder if maybe that works in the psychological sense too. Like I'm almost shielded. Like I'll come home, disappointed with what happened that day in the gallery, just like anybody does come home from work if they've had a bad day and stuff. But in the end, that can still be the gallery as a separate entity. But man, when it's your own work, you don't turn it off, And so, I mean, I think that my failures. When I got out of school, like many of us, when we got out of school, there's a lot of energy, and so you're flailing around and you're trying a lot of things, and so odds are you're going to have a lot of unexpected successes and a lot of unexpected failures. And I guess the commonality there is everything's unexpected, And so I think that, like, I was thinking about something that always bugged me. From back then, and I was contacted by an author once, and it's happened a few times, but this was the very first time, and I didn't, and this was back in the ancient days of slides. And,
I don't remember those.
I mean, and just the struggle to get a set of 20 good slides. It wasn't a struggle to have 20 good paintings. I mean, well, sometimes it was. But I mean, it's just like, but then you had to get you had to get a good slide of each of those 20 paintings. And so you finally get to that point, and it's like an achievement in and of itself. And then somebody asks you for those slides. And I was asked, I was somebody who was early on the bandwagon to have a website. And it was like mid 90s, and it was, like a pretty lame at the time, though. It looked like everybody else's website, that was the private citizen. It was like like a black page with neon letters at the top. Right. But at the very least, I had a name and an email address and a phone number and a bunch of photos of my paintings, and people were finding it. And this one author found it, and there weren't a lot of encaustic painters. I should mention, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to the podcast know what encaustic painting is, but any process that uses molten beeswax as like the fundamental material and process. So I was using molten beeswax in my work as like the main one of the main ingredients, and this artist was also a writer, and she was going to do a book on encaustic painting, and so I was excited to get the call, but I didn't know who she was, and I didn't really, you never know. Like, I've been contacted for a number of books, and some are real and some aren't. And so it was one of those, I had just moved to Chicago, and there were a lot of shows going on. I was busy getting my work out. And so I was excited about it, though, and I put the slides together and sent them off. But I did not follow up on that. I just sent them out there. And I guess they never made it to, the place. So, I mean, I can jump right to the lesson. The lesson is, man, like, you should really follow up on those kinds of things. And I've done it ever since. But, it was disappointing to me, because that turned into quite the beautiful book. And many shows were curated from that book. From that, over the next decade and a half. And it was, and I always went, So the lesson is, like, I could have been, following up. I could have I don't really have memories of the details, but I'm sure I could have had a tracking number and watched that thing arrive, and called the author and say, did you get it? Are they good? Exactly. And it would have been just a courtesy with an author that's got a million things that they've got to do, that would have been nice.
No, I think, that's a great lesson, to follow up, because especially now with email, you get so many emails. Sometimes you respond to calls, you respond to things, to opportunities that might be coming up, but then you forget about it. It's so easy to forget about the things that you are responding. And
it's harder now than ever before.
Exactly. And definitely, I think that's a great lesson for us to follow up.
There's also a great lesson in the fact that things that you consider to be failures can turn themselves around. You know?
Yeah.
So a wonderful kind of redemption of that kind of failure moment that I've always looked back on and felt bummed out about is the fact that I ended up becoming friends from a distance. That was she was a New York artist and author, and but we, you know, every time she came to Chicago, she'd stop by the gallery, and we would stay kind of loosely in touch, and we were aware of each other's work, and I was aware of her blog, and then she invited me just this past year to she started an international encaustic conference about 8 years ago, and invited me to come speak at it as somebody who's been doing it for it was like the old men and women of encaustic. Who's been doing this longer than ever?
The legends.
So I had to swallow my pride there that I was like, you know, a young encaustic artist. But then it was great being on that panel and teaching workshops, and it was an opportunity that came from that initial awareness of each other, even though it didn't work out back then. It worked out later. So.
No, that's great, because actually you almost answered my following questions. I always ask, you know, what was the disappointment, but then what was the opposite side? What was a success or something that came out of that, or some proud moment? So.
There you go. We got a twofer out of that.
Exactly. That fits perfect. That's great. Now, let me ask you this question. Do you have a piece of advice for an emerging artist who's trying to approach a gallery? How should they go about it?
Yeah, you know, this is great because I've been asked, I mean, I've spoken on this before, and I find that what's intriguing about this topic is that you have to learn the fundamentals of the gallery approach, you know, how to show your work and submit your work and those kinds of things. The same way you have to learn the fundamentals to everything. But then life is out there throwing curveballs all the time. And so I've often found that even, you know, I'm an artist, and so I've exhibited at galleries, and I've found that sometimes the best gallery relationships that I've become involved in didn't happen because I had a beautiful portfolio, you know. They happened because of some chance view that they saw a postcard and stuck it on their bulletin board, and then like a year later got around to flipping it over, and then they saw a phone number and they called me, and you know, and it's just, you never know where these opportunities are going to come from. So the idea is to be prepared in the micro sense of like having that portfolio looking good, having a website that's sharp and easy to navigate and gives you nice, beautiful representation. I mean, beautiful photos. I mean, that's probably, I would whittle it down to just have some really beautiful photos of your work, because there's so many people with nice looking websites and bad looking photos on them. And it's just like, what?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, we've got such an opportunity, you know, like to be out from under the slides. That is one of you asked what's changed in the gallery world. That's the big change. Right. That and how different the critical world is now in terms of reviewers, you know, and where they wrote before versus the blogosphere now, you know. And that would be that's a whole nother 20-minute conversation.
That's right.
But having great photography, the opportunity now to distribute that photography is huge, and it's very different than it used to be. But at the same time, because we live in a DIY world, where more artists than ever before are out there taking pictures themselves, and that's totally cool if you're getting great photos.
Exactly.
And you've got Photoshop to clean it up, and so we've got we can control it a lot better now, but it still is important to get really good photos. And if that means hiring a professional, man, you got to do it. You got to get the best up front. But then the big lesson is that it doesn't always work that way. Like you can have the best photos in the world, and then somebody sees some crappy little Polaroid sitting, you know. I have had people come in and give me wonderful portfolios, and then the work was great, but it just didn't fit the gallery. And then I've had other people walk in to the gallery that are artists, and they were not out promoting their own work. You could just tell. They were just out looking at art. but they had a way of talking about art. And they were looking at it in a way that, that caught my attention. And we started talking about it. And when we talked, I could tell they were artists, but they were thoughtful, and they weren't talking about themselves. And I would start asking them questions. Like, so are you an artist? And then they go, yeah. And then I'm like, well, so what do you do? What kind of work do you do? And then they're saying, well, it's hard to describe. I guess it would be blah, blah, blah. And then I'm thinking, now I'm trying to develop a picture in my head, but it's not there yet. And so what's my next question? It's like, well, do you have any photos? Or now the question is, do you have a website? So, and I'm thinking right now of like 3 or 4 artists that we show in the gallery that I had this very conversation with.
Wow, that's great.
And then they said, yeah, it's like www whatever. And I go on, and I, on a couple of occasions, on the majority of occasions, it's like, wow, this is really cool work. And we have a nice parting of the ways then, and everything's cool because I can't show everything that's good.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But I can think of 2 or 3 times where I saw the work there, and I literally turned to one person in particular, I'm thinking, said, do you have any shows lined up for the spring? Because I've got an opening. I was like, right then I wanted to it wasn't.
Sign them up.
Absolutely. And then one of the best example is this guy that came in, and he had a backpack, and he was there for a wedding or something, and we got into this conversation. I said, what kind of work do you do? And he fumbles around in his backpack and pulls out 2 crumpled photographs.
Okay.
Drops them on my desk. This is everything you tell artists not to do. And they were fantastic. I said, well, when can you ship work out to me? And he became one of our top selling artists in the gallery, and very reflected. He's got a great reputation, but he has this, he had this one blind spot, about like, he just was not interested in technology and not interested in photography. And
well, that's golden advice, Dan. I think that is awesome. And the way you presented both sides, it's really, really interesting. Approachability, I think, seems to be very important.
Luck. It sounds like luck has a lot to do with it, and that's very deflating, I think, for a lot of artists, because it takes it out of our control, and it's like, well, it's always luck, and what if I don't get the good luck and the good breaks? But the point is that your artwork always has to be there, Like you've got to be ready for when, because you will get a lot of, we don't always identify it, but everybody gets lucky breaks all the time. Yeah. We just don't always think we do. But everything that's happened that has moved your life in a positive direction has been an opportunity that you were either ready for, that you were ready for if it worked out. And so, it was like that when that one gallerist grabbed one of my postcards, and it was in a stack of postcards on his desk for, months. But when he turned that, like, I could not predict that was going to happen. But when he called me up, I had to be ready to go. And I had to have
ready to act, exactly.
5 good paintings to send to him right then. And that ended up being a relationship that lasted for a decade, and he sold just about everything I sent him. So
that's wonderful.
You never know.
Exactly, you never know. And I think, you mentioned luck, but it's also, being present and being there and being out there. I think in those cases that you mentioned, the people that walked into your gallery, they were not pushy about it, but they were there, they were out, they were looking, and in that process of being out there, this opportunity opened up, and that's wonderful.
Yeah. And they were engaged, the more you spend time looking at artwork, the more you'll find things happening. Things will start happening in your studio if you spend time, in galleries and in museums looking at the art that is important to you and that moves you. That will do things to you in the studio, and it's not tainting your gig, it's like giving you, it's doing something on a fundamental level to you. And then those things happen when, in a social way too.
Expected. Absolutely.
When you're striking up conversations, you don't know what that person is going to say next. They might say, guess what? I'm curating a show next month, and I did not know who the 5th person in that show was going to be, but now I do.
Yeah, and that has been my case for many of the shows I've curated over the last few years. Just sometimes talking to somebody who happens to talk about somebody else that gives me interest. I go home, I look them up, and it might be a great fit for a show that I'm at the moment curating.
Yeah.
You just don't know. And that person has no idea.
Yeah.
And those things happen all the time, behind the scenes, which is great.
In spite of that, I do think that there are a few specific things that an artist can start doing right away when they're making their presentations that will give them a leg up. And, one of them is really simple. It's that if you're having a meeting with a gallery, having a presentation packet that is more than just a CD. Sometimes you hand somebody a CD and they're like, well, I'll get around to it, or they'll put it in and then it's not opening right or whatever. Right. And it's better to just, I think, have a, one of those folders with plastic sleeves in it that you can just hand somebody, and it doesn't cost much. And the only real responsibility you have then is just get really good high-resolution photographs and print them out on good photo paper. It doesn't take much time or money, but it will that will do you a world of good. And if you hand that to somebody along with a resume already slipped into there, that's everything that they need for that first impression. You can make a good first impression right away, and you can constantly update it, unlike a catalog. You can always put the new work in. So I think that's an important thing. And also, we always say do your research, and you want the galleries to pay attention to your art. So you want to pay attention to the galleries you're looking at too, and not just go randomly shotgunning them all. You might want to spend some time looking online, but then also going to the gallery and saying, yeah, this place fits with me, or, I like coming here, but it isn't really my deal. And then finally, I would say it's good to incorporate the artists that you already know into the process. It's not really about using them, but it's more about having a conversation with an artist friend of yours who's in a gallery that you're interested in, and saying, look, I certainly don't want to step on your toes, and you tell me if you don't think this would be a good idea, but hey, I feel like my work would make sense there. Would you be willing to give me an introduction? Because as you know, Sergio, 9 out of 10 of these contacts and connections come from somebody else mentioning your name.
It's a network, right?
Yeah, right. So ask that person. I don't think we need to be too shy about it. Ask that person, hey, would you be willing to recommend me? All the time we say, can I put you as a reference on a letter or an application? So it's kind of the same thing. And they'll tell you if they don't think it's a good idea. Don't back them into a corner, but just utilize those connections if you have them. Sometimes we just don't think about that. So. Absolutely.
So that is wonderful, and I really appreciate for you taking the time to go so deep in this particular question, because I think it's very important. Mm-hmm. And it's a question that I get asked all the time from artists who come to my gallery, come to me, trying to start their career. And in a world that keeps on changing and moving under their feet, it's important. These things are very important.
Yeah, man, it's hard, but putting together those kind of consortiums of other artists that care about the same things you do, and having those networks, that's really the majority of success stories I hear come from those kind of connections, and not from what kind of program you use to develop your website.
One last question, Dan, and then we'll let you go. Yeah. You've been so generous to us with all your awesome answers. But just tell us, how can our listeners find out more about your gallery? Tell us the website where we can find you, just general information about your gallery.
Well, here's what you can do. You can come physically to the gallery. It's one of those last places where we need to experience things in the real, when everything else is virtual,
Exactly.
And that's never, I really believe that's never going to change, because that's either the physicality of artwork is either going to be there as a reaction to the virtual world, or as a proactive kind of thing that fulfills just a built-in longing and desire that we have. So whether it's a pendulum swing, or whether it's just an ingrained part of our psyche, we always want to. I mean, there's a part of us that is satisfied by physically interacting with these objects that are made by other people's hands. Like we're getting something from that we're not getting. And I would say, and a lot of the work that we show has a conceptual component, and it also has that physicality. And so it will engage your mind, but it's going to engage your body. That means that at some point you've got to, if you live in Chicago, you've got to walk through the doors. This isn't a pitch to get you to come,
Exactly.
But you know what? There are a lot of, it's the most amazing resource that we have in Chicago. Like there are a few good gallery neighborhoods, but just for instance, to take the one I'm in River North, it is a miracle that there are galleries still there, considering the way property values have fluctuated up and then down and then up again, and we're on the upswing again. And I would urge people to take advantage of there's a Starbucks Saturdays tour that happens every Saturday. I lead it. Sometimes other gallerists lead it too. It starts at 11 o'clock at the Starbucks under the L on Franklin in Chicago, and people from all around, and tourists and Chicagoans that have lived here their whole life, they take this tour and they have a blast and they come back. It's different every Saturday. It's 4 galleries. You get the behind the scenes talk from the people, and so that's what I'd say. If you want to know more about Addington Gallery, find out more about River North, because we're part of that world, and come into that. It's one of the few places where you can see scores of galleries in a 3-block radius, and so a real opportunity.
It makes a great walk, great experience to go from gallery to gallery, see completely different things. It's awesome.
It's free.
It's free, absolutely.
It's free, and it's different every month. If you like art, it's a resource that that would be ridiculous to ignore. Exactly. And then we've got a website. It's www.addingtongallery.com, as you would expect. And so
your location, your address?
We're at 704 North Wells Street on the Chicago, on Wells Street between Superior and Huron. Okay. So, it's there are a lot of galleries on Wells. There's like 2 or 3 on our block, and then 2 on the next block, and then you turn the corner onto Superior Street, and the Mother Lode is there, and there's 30 more.
Great. So. Well, no, that's great. Thank you very much, Dan. And we hope to all our listeners, we want to ask you to, next time you're at River North, you come to Chicago to visit, make sure you stop at Addington Gallery. Go there, say hi to Dan, and tell him if you heard this podcast. That would be great.
And my you'll see my own work on danaddington.com.
Awesome.
It's a separate website, and you can learn a little bit about encaustic painting there, and more about how to use wax and things like that. So.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Dan. It's been great to having you on board. It's been great. There's so much great information you have provided for us. We want to thank all our listeners as well for spending time with you and me today.
Yeah, absolutely.
We hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next level.
Check out our website at www.theartistnextlevel.com, where you will find our podcast library, learn about our upcoming webinars, find resources relevant to your career, and much more. Thanks for listening to today's podcast, and we'll see you at the next level.